the thing that I've noticed is when people describe their pain, they will often describe somebody else saying something that what the person actually said was, I'm for this. But what they're describing is having heard that person is anti this other thing, right? So
Yeah.
somebody will describe, I'm pro ceasefire, and maybe a Jewish person will have heard them say, I'm anti-Semitic, right?
Yes, 100%.
And I've never seen an issue where, just in terms of the structure of dualistic thought, I've never seen a political issue where it was that much like sort of ascribing an anti when people said they were for something, which sounds pretty good,
Hmm.
like I'm pro-Semitic, right? Then other people might
Yeah.
hear, well, you're a Zionist pig or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I've never heard this is the thing, it's intensified in just listening to people, how much people mishear what other people are saying. And I'm like, I don't think they actually said they're against that when they said that thing. And people are like, no, 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 you need to study the history. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know enough. I'm just going by what I heard. And I didn't hear what you heard in what they said. And that I've never had a situation more like that in just listening to people.
I know. I mean, because, you think about Shambhala, right? And like how married everyone was to this ideology and this beautiful, you know, paradigm that we were both part of, right? And then when it started to crumble and allegations came out that were very real, there was that clinging to like, no, this can't be true, right?
Right.
Because it was a threat to your community, your ideology, your everyday life, your belief system. It's just too, it was too much of a threat to like your entire existence. And I think that that's the case. Like, in Israel, there's such a connection, a link between community and ideology and religion and the state of Israel that it's really hard to be objective, you know?
Mm.
And then when it feels like the Holocaust wasn't that long ago, right? And then we have um, Hamas is anti-Zionist, which um, that's in their charter to be anti-Zionism, but it sounds like I want to kill all Jews, but that's actually not even like that's not the idea. It's more about Zionism than Judaism,
Mm.
and that has to do with the history of pushing people who had been living there out for 2,000 years and raping their women and massacring their children and all of that. And so it didn't start well, so it started with like a lot of right righteous resentment, and
Right.
of on the Palestinian part. So now it's like, okay, where do we go from here? Because Israel exists and Palestinians need to exist too, but there's so much anger and
Right.
rage, and then where do we go from here? But I do think astrologically we're going to see something shift by springtime, something big.
Mm.
And I don't know exactly what that is yet, but we have this powerful eclipse season followed by the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So on an astrological level, I do think we're going to see something happening that might be hopeful, that might be peaceful, or
Mm.
it's like a step towards peace.
Oh,
But
that would be so good. Yeah,
oh my God,
that's been, and I think a lot of people who are going online, I think the vast majority of people are just like, what happened to just wanting peace and
I
not
know.
being considered naive
I
for
know.
that, Like that's the thing that always bums me out is like if you're pro peace, it's like you don't understand the dynamics. And it's like maybe if you're waving a gun, you don't understand how being a human works. I just want that
I
to like
agree with you.
be an option on the table, like just
Yes.
nonviolence, return to that as like something that's not naive, that's actually more evolved, than like strategic violence. you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or going into somebody's land and like indiscriminately killing their children, like that's,
Mhm.
and then I'm like, I'm against that. And then it's like, you're naive. I'm like, no.
No, yeah, like if that's naive, I want to live in the naive place, right?
Yeah, then may I be naive,
Where's the naive spot to live in, you
Beam
know?
me up to the naive planet, please. But agree. I mean, you and I are Buddhists, and it's like we don't even kill mosquitoes,
I
Um,
mean, sometimes I by accident, but I try. I do my best.
or if someone near me kills a gnat, I'll do like a prayer, like
Right.
I'm very conscious of like treating all beings as if they were my mother in a past life, and that sense of sacredness, or I keep thinking of being in solitary retreat and having this deep reverence for the fly in my
Mm,
cabin, um and then imagining killing somebody's family
mhm,
for no who were not a threat. And I'm like, I don't understand.
mhm.
It just doesn't compute. And maybe that does make me naive. But again, like I wish that didn't,
Right, right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I keep thinking, is this like Buddhist conditioning that I'm so against brutality, violence, and death? And then I'm like, no, I remember I accidentally killed a lizard once when I was 7 and I wept for like a week, like
Mm,
that's just my nature.
mm.
I don't relate I don't relate to wanting anyone to be killed or tortured.
Right, right. Can we get back to the tech conversation? Because I feel like you're going to have like good and crazy, Star Trek level insights into where things might be going. So, first, I want to lay out my issue with tech, because I really like technology,
Yeah.
but it never seems like we have technological advances like what we are able to do always predates our readiness to do that thing, and that there's a famous Dr. King quote where he says like the means by which we live have outstripped the reasons for which we live, and then he says we have guided missiles but misguided men. Basically,
Yes.
the humans have to evolve to the point that they can even be with the missiles without causing great harm. So I do feel like social media, like when you look at what it's done, I mean, on the flip side of this, it's greatly increased adolescent depression, anxiety.
Yes.
That's very scary for me as a parent. And I think it's also like, oh, you struggle in your relationships with like 10 or 12 other people. How about having relationships with 3,000 people in public simultaneously? And it's like, that sounds like a great step forward. And in many ways it is, but the social, emotional development that would be needed to hold that, and it feels like AI is going to exactly the same place. Like the people who are advocating for it, it's like this is going to be amazing what we can do here, and it sounds amazing. Like when you look at, I mean, ChatGPT isn't that amazing as I've used it, but I get that it's going to really amazing new places. But there seems to be a lot of danger in not knowing why we're doing this thing and just knowing that we can do this thing.
100%. I mean, and if in the wrong hands, AI is like extremely dangerous. And I do think we are like one button away from like absolute oblivion, like I
Does that
keep
happen in
thinking
2024?
you know what? I keep thinking of that Bucky Fuller quote that goes, "Whether it is to be utopia or oblivion will be a touch and go relay race right up to the final moment."
Great. Fun times.
Yeah, but it's also like I think that the depression of the younger generation is actually important. It's obviously a crisis and horrible, but it's important because they're like, this can't be how the world is. We can't sustain this because we are looking. We're not looking away like the other generation. And somehow there has to be that ability to look and to keep your heart open and to construct a new reality based on that looking and keeping your heart open. But in terms of technology, yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that's part of what the Aquarian Age ideally will be about is we already have the means to like clean up plastic, you grow, mushrooms have the ability to like take inorganic material and make it organic again, even nuclear waste, right? We know how to do things. We just don't have the funding. We don't have the prioritization in place, or we actually waste like 70% of the world's food. It's not an overpopulation problem, it's a distribution problem, right? We're not living sensibly with the earth and with each other, like privatized prisons and everything being privatized has led to immense problems that are inhumane and all about profit over people. And I think that if we can first correct our ideological frameworks and priorities and value human life over profit, right? Then there's so much technology we've already developed that we can implement in order to reconstruct reality. And we can. And so I think it is going to take like the younger generations coming of age to actually steer the ship differently, right? Because I just don't see it happening with the older generations and with all the lobbyists that are in place in DC. It's like, how do we get there?
We love you, Gen Xers and Boomers, but this is we love you.
Step aside. Let the Gen Zers take over.
And Julian and I are both, I'm a few years older than you, but we're both on the very tail end of Gen X, so we can talk. We'll step aside too.
Yeah, I'm stepping aside.
I'm tired.
I've been empowering the millennials and the Gen Zers for a while now. Like, you guys got it, Like, I feel like I've been a cheerleader for them, and when the older generations have been so hard on them, And I don't feel that way. I think they're like awesome. Like, they're so courageous, and they just and in a way it's like, oh, the world is gonna end, right? They grew up with that message, like climate change is gonna destroy the planet, and they're like, well, what do we have to lose? We have to speak the truth.
Right. Yeah, they do. That does seem to be like, everything else seems to be like, okay, if it was just the problem of violence in the world, or racism or patriarchy, it's like, okay, we could go a few more rounds around the samsaric wheel, cause a great amount of suffering, but human society would still be here, right? With the climate crisis, it's like, oh no, this might, like, we don't have a few more times around the suffering wheel to figure that out.
No, we don't. It's urgent, right? And I always hold the highest possibilities, right? Because if we aren't, then it's not possible. And someone, at least a few people, need to be holding the highest possibilities in order to make them a reality. And I do feel like there can be massive changes this year that can lead us to a more positive outcome. But it does require every individual rising, right? And us joining together in this coalition of hearts, and not giving up and not falling into despair, even if we're looking, at the reality of the horrors of the world. But yeah, I keep thinking of Bucky Fuller, because I feel like he should be the guru of this moment. But we can go back and read his words, because he really got it, But I have a few quotes I love of his. One is, we are called to be architects of the future, not its victims, and that's very Aquarian age, right? We've got to construct a new reality instead of just passively being the victims of the current reality.
Right. So that's an interesting point, right? The notion of overcoming, like, obviously when there's an oppressor and oppressed, when there's harm caused, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the harm, but also viewing oneself as kind of like victim can also be very disempowering, like just to look at the generational aspect, like, if Gen Zers are like, hey, Boomers and Gen X's, you fucked us over, like from a Buddhist standpoint, it's like, well, it was actually karmically, it was your time to be born too. And it's not wrong that our generation and previous generations did not handle, the climate crisis, for example. But that idea of like, how do we empower rather than victimize when we're in a difficult situation, is very interesting just kind of psychological, spiritual shift in perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there are victims all, in the planet right now. I mean, that's
Of
not
course.
that, but it's just sort of like, if you can be the architect, don't fall into despair, you know,
Right.
and don't just allow things to happen if you can do something about it. And then there's this other quote that I love, and it goes, "It is now highly feasible to take care of everybody on earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. It is a matter of converting high technology from weaponry to livingry."
And what year was that Buckminster Fuller quote from?
I think it was the 60s.
Right. So
Yeah.
that was the early, that was the first. So that, I mean, this is a way, it's really interesting, to set these generations apart, because if the 60s were the first moment of the Aquarian age, that was the boomers. They just then
Yes.
went in a different direction as a general generalization. Again, not to overgeneralize any specific person's experience, but that
Yes.
is an interesting thing, that they were the Gen Zers and then something
Exactly.
shifted.
Right. I mean, the civil rights movement and, like this future thinking and utopia thinking and like, how can we live differently and live in more peace? And there's a lot of Eastern philosophy that started seeping in. But I don't know. I keep thinking like, what happened, and it was like sort of the late 70s into the early 80s, what happened? And it was like they gave up psychedelics for cocaine. I don't know.
That's a big shift. Mushrooms to cocaine will
I
take you in a
know.
different direction for sure.
But I do think that the themes of that time are returning, and it's now time to really implement those themes in a lasting way, right? Not as like, that was an interesting flash in the pan, it's like, in
Yeah.
a way we're constructing the new reality based off of those ideas.
So I guess my last question is returning to your work, because you've become, it's interesting. I didn't know I was going to become a decently known like Buddhist teacher, psychological thinker. I always wanted to like write poetry and fiction, but you've become a well-known voice in the astrology community, right? Your book was a bestseller, The Stars Within You. I do recommend people following you and getting your updates via your website, etherealculture.com. But if somebody wanted to kind of study astrology in this kind of grounded scientific like way, like how would you like, I know a little bit about it. I understand like sun, moon, rising sign, what those mean. The houses, I always have to look at like a chart of like, wait, what is the sixth house? What is this house? And I mean, obviously reading your book, but if somebody actually wanted to study astrology, like what are the next steps to actually using it in a way that it's, informative?
Yeah, well, I think starting with a book like mine is really good, getting the fundamentals in place, really understanding the on an intuitive level, the archetypal energies of each sign, and then the houses correspond with the signs, so that gets easier once you understand that. And then understanding the planets and their archetypal energies as well. And then you start weaving it together. And the best way to learn is to just keep listening to talks. I love Stephen Forrest, or reading books. I love Stephen Forrest books, Liz Green's books, just like absorbing information. But most importantly, it's applying it, right? So it's just reading as many charts as possible. So go to astro.com, pull up the chart of someone you know really well, and then look up each placement, like
Hmm.
the sun in this, the moon in that, and think about that person you know so well and apply that to what you know of the person. And then you'll start to have a deeper intuitive understanding of how these energies manifest. And then keep doing that. Just read as many charts as possible that way, where you're literally looking up everything. And then it starts to become second nature, because it's a language, right?
Hmm.
And the only way you can learn the language is through practice, 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 right? And so I mean, you have to be a little bit obsessed with it. I think a lot of people get into astrology because they're like lovers, and they're like wanting to understand this person they've fallen in love with, and then this other person they've fallen in love with. And,
And
like,
why it keeps not working out to fall in love with that person over and over
yeah,
again.
like, why do I feel such passionate desire for this person? And it's like, oh, my Mars is on their moon. Okay. And then, or like, what do you think they're thinking or feeling? Okay, I need to understand their moon and their Venus and their. So that is often a big motivator for getting obsessed with it. But it does require repetition and passion because it is a complex language and system.
That's a beautiful piece of advice, though, to work backwards, starting with someone you know well, and then look at their chart and start to. Yeah, that's very
Yeah, because then it's
conversational.
not, yeah, and then it's not memorizing. It's like really feeling, because it is an intuitive art. Astrology is intuition, psychology, storytelling, cosmology. It's just like everything. It's like astronomy, it's geometry. There's so many things involved in it, but it's primarily this intuitive art. So if you work with it intuitively more than intellectually in terms of memorization, it'll come much faster.
All right. Thank you so much. I think this is a good place to leave off for today. I wanted to. It's always great to hear your perspective and spend an hour talking to you. And again, we both love all the generations, so nobody get mad at either of us if something we said was anti one generation. And it's really just talking about movements in history. And
We love everyone. We're Buddhists.
we're Buddhists. Like any mosquitoes, spotted lanternflies. I don't think y'all have those in either Dallas or Los Angeles, but that is the biggest dilemma because you're supposed to kill those because they kill trees, right? So that's that's the hardest Buddhist dilemma in the inside. I know. And they're beautiful too. They're like a gorgeous little like weird hipster looking butterfly. So. But Juliana McCarthy, everybody should check out The Stars Within You and Ethereal Culture. And if and when the internet goes down sometime this spring, you can think of, if not Juliana's fault, she's just the one that told you so.
It may not be that. It could be
Maybe
some
something else.
shocking event, like death of a
Anything weird that happens this spring, think of Juliana McCarthy. All right. Good to keep sense of humor in difficult times. So thanks so much, Juliana.
Thank you so much. You're such a sane, amazing, loving voice in this crazy time.
I always appreciate our friendship quite a lot. So, all right, for the road home, this is Ethan Midturn, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the Road Home Podcast with Ethan Midturn.